I'm delighted to be here with you. I kind of feel like we're on the set of The Friendly Giant or something. Two little chairs to curl up in. I've been here 24 hours in Winnipeg, Treaty 1 territory, and I keep hearing about the Vancouver conference where you spoke, Your Excellency, 2 years ago, and changed the direction of the community foundations of Canada. What did you say?
Well, Sheila, speaking about hearing about someone, we've been hearing from you on radio for some number of years.
About 400.
At least. Right back to one of the beginnings. But I was in church on Sunday, and I had a chat with your mom. And I told her
Not fair.
how much I was looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Thank
So
you.
that's the thing that I've heard about, and it shows what a small country you are. It was really wonderful, the Vancouver conference 2 years ago, when I did speak about a smart and caring country. And I guess what's been so exciting for me is that it obviously is a very fundamental Canadian value. And that's demonstrated, I think, by how warmly and enthusiastically and imaginatively the Community Foundation of Canada and the various parts of our Community Foundation across the country have taken it up.
How do you see Canadians responding to your call to action?
Well, I think each in their own ways, in different ways. One of the challenges of Vancouver 2 years ago was to ensure that we had a community foundation presence in every reasonable sized community in the country, 50,000 or 35,000. Since that time, I think we've had 21 community foundations in a little more than 2 years, and that's a pretty good rate. That's 10 a year. If we go back to our beginning here in Winnipeg a little less than 100 years ago, we're clipping along at a reasonably good rate. The thing I think I've most appreciated, though, is some of the community foundations in the larger centers have taken on a responsibility for encouraging the development of nascent community foundations and smaller ones. I was just chatting with Tracy from Grand Prairie, Northwest Alberta. Tracy, where are you? Just stand up so people way back there hear Tracy's story when you're chatting in the corridors. 3 or 4 smaller communities have been nurtured by her foundation, beginning with 1 or 2 grants, but forming the local advisory committee, and from that, of course, will come community foundation presence in communities as small as 2,500. So that's terrific, and I think the other great thing that I remember from Vancouver was that the idea of starting smart and caring funds, keener minds and kinder hearts, would find a place within community foundations, and that has happened quite substantially across the country, and that's wonderful to see.
This plays out on a number of levels, of course. We're at a national conference. I know that Errol Winter is here somewhere from Haida Gwaii. I'm looking for you, Errol. Where are you?
Right here.
Oh, hi. So nice to see you. So you can have a community foundation in a place like Haida Gwaii. You can have a community foundation in a place like Toronto or Dartmouth. And I've met many, many people here. How do you see it playing out on a national level and then on a local level?
Well, first of all, I think the values that so move a community foundation are very much Canadian values. We are a country built on the concept of equality of opportunity. And we are a country that has a sense of helping our neighbors. I tell the story of our first governor, Samuel de Champlain, Governor General in all but name. And in 1608, in that first settlement in Nova Scotia, the community of European settlers only survived because the local native people provided them with fresh meat and taught them how to make a tea from the needles of evergreen trees, which actually prevented scurvy from happening. So that notion of neighbor helping neighbor is kind of bred in the bone, has been in the DNA of the country. So I think that we are tapping into something that is a rich and important vein in Canadian life, and it happens at the local level in its own way of expression. We are a nation of barn raisers. Before we moved to Ottawa, we lived in Waterloo County, 10 minutes away from the University of Waterloo where I worked, and our neighbors were Mennonite. They were horse and buggy people, and they have a great tradition of barn raising. And so when a new person came into the community, they'd help them build the barn. And that wasn't just people of their own religious persuasion. My wife managed our farm with 36 horses boarded on it, and insurance was always an issue. And one day, Edgar, Mennonite neighbor who farms our farm, was there. And she was looking at the various buildings, and she said, "Edgar, what do you think the drive shed is worth?" "What do you mean?" "Well, how much would it cost if we had to replace it? Because I have to put a replacement value on it for insurance, and I don't want to have to pay any more insurance than I should, but on the other hand, I want to be sure that we would have the money to replace it." Well, he said, "Replace it for what?" "Well, if it burned down." Well, he said, "If it burned down, we'd replace it." That's what neighbors do. Oh, and then he said, "But we'd have some used lumber, of course, but the asphalt shingles would burn. We'd probably have to buy those, so put $1,500 on it and we'd get it built." That's Canada, and that's Canada at its best. And that notion of barn raising, that notion of helping another, that notion that's been part of Canadian history from the very beginning, that life shall be better for our next generation, for our children, because of our own efforts and that of our neighbors, is very much a central part of the creed that makes Canada a special place.
And I know that something that's very important to you is how this plays out in our neighborhoods, on the ground, in the grassroots communities, because you give out a lot of awards over the course of a year for people helping their neighbors. What does that mean to you personally?
Well, the award you refer to, Sheila, was one that Romeo LeBlanc started as a Governor General's award, not a Queen-sanctioned award, although I expect it'll get that way. And this year we've given out about 300 Caring Canadian awards, and we'll do that a little later today. And I hope this next year it'll be 500, and then I hope we'll ramp it up to 1,000. And it's to recognize those people who aren't household names, are not in the headlines of newspapers, but day after day, year after year, are flooding the local rink, are running the food bank, are the driving forces in Meals on Wheels, and just do good. And in doing so, they inspire all the rest of us. So it's really made us feel awfully good to recognize these unsung heroes.
And they're everywhere.
They are.
Even in the Delta Hotel last night when I was being given my dinner by a lovely young man named Mackenzie Leslie. He'd received a Duke of Edinburgh award, actually. And he was out busy helping his neighborhood, and he was rewarded for it. Rewards do mean something, but there are a lot of unsung heroes, too.
And you know, it's happening with young people, which is the great challenge. How do you transmit this from generation to generation? I suppose most of you would say that we tend to learn giving from within our families. It's handed down from generation to generation, but not always. We had a youth roundtable yesterday where 150 young people were talking about what happened with volunteer activities in their schools and their clubs and how they extended it. Yesterday we visited Hannah Taylor's Ladybug Foundation. How many of you know Hannah Taylor's work with the Ladybug Foundation? It's extraordinary. Hannah's now 17, and at age 5, she saw a homeless man scavenging in a dumpster trying to find some food on a really cold winter day. And she says that really bothered her, a 5-year-old. And with the encouragement of her parents and an inspiring kindergarten or grade 1 teacher, she began to do some research of what do we do about that? What do I do about that? And she encouraged her classmates to have a bake sale. Now, I suspect the mums had a little bit of help with the bake sale, but they did the bake sale and they actually made some toys and so on. And I think they raised $1,600, which went to the Siloam mission that I visited yesterday, a place for homeless people that is doing remarkable work. And there, in one part of it, was Hannah's emergency corner where emergency supplies, toiletries, and towels and things like that are given out that they collect. This young gal who at age 5 started all this and now has so many other young people inspired. Craig Kielberger was with us on our trip to Africa 2 weeks ago. I think Craig started at 9 when he was very concerned about child labor and began the Free the Children movement. And when we were in Africa, he said, I think the movement has built 400 schools so far with 1,500 volunteers a year. And they have these marvelous wee days. Your children or grandchildren have probably been to some. They bring young people together in a hockey arena or an auditorium of some kind for a great celebration of from me to we, from the first person singular to the first person plural. And what a liberating great force. I'm told it's the largest youth volunteer organization in the world now, starting from a 9-year-old.
It's amazing. Do you think we have it in us to give, all of us?
Yeah. It's in us, in all of us to give. For so many reasons, as I indicated a moment ago, Shelagh, I think it's very much part of the Canadian tradition. Hugh MacLennan, that great novelist, he was at McGill during my McGill years, referred to Canadians one time as a nation of losers. He didn't mean that we were people who were bereft of spirit or didn't know how to compete. Vancouver 2010 Olympics, 14 gold medals wasn't bad. But by that he meant our history has been of immigrants who've chosen to come to this country, including our first Indigenous people, because they saw a better life for their children. And in almost every case, our ancestors, those first brave people that came to Canada, didn't come with any status. There weren't many titles around in those days. Didn't come with much property, and very often were fleeing oppression. And they were determined that life shall be better for the next generation, not only for their children, but for their neighbors. That to me is a transcendent Canadian value that shines through again and again. And with the wave upon wave of immigrant that continues to come this country, the most welcoming country in the world in terms of immigrants, that same tradition continues. And the other nice thing about this country is we don't say, check your cultural heritage at the door or at the port. Bring it with you and enriching the country accordingly. One of my favorite expressions comes from the French Saint-Exupéry, Le Petit Prince, who says, I am different from you, but because I'm different, I do not diminish you, I enrich in you. And that's been such an important part of the Canadian tapestry.
I think that's been a great theme here just over the course of the day. We've been talking and hearing a lot of stories, but also hearing about the importance of stories and sharing stories. And when I hear your story, I am enlarged by it. Your story makes me a larger human being. And I think that has something to do with compassion. How do you think we rate on the compassion scale?
Well, I think it's part of Canadian tradition as well, Shelagh. I was saying earlier today that a few months ago, Chancellor Merkel, Angela Merkel, was with us in Ottawa, and was with us at Rideau Hall. And I had the most fascinating conversation with her. She's a very wise and very thoughtful woman. She was a professor of chemistry before she entered politics. She comes from East Germany. Her father was a Lutheran pastor. And her English is quite good. And we were like if I may say this about the German chancellor, like a couple of students, because I was cross-examining her on whether the European Union, which won the Nobel Peace Prize last year, 6 decades of peace in Europe, which over the last 1,000 years has seldom had a decade or a consecutive decade of peace. And she was grilling me on this crazy patchwork quilt Canada. How can you live with such difference? How can you have hyphenated Canadians? How can you have all of these different languages, religions, races, traditions, etc., and somehow it works? And I was quoting to her a book by James Robinson called Why Nations Fail. I'm particularly attached to it. He's a scholar at Harvard, wrote it with another scholar at MIT, but it's out of the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research Global Economy program, which brings scholars from all over the world to tackle tough problems. And the thesis is, the nations that thrive are those who are inclusive in their economics and their politics, and those that go into a downward spiral are those who are extractive in their economics and politics. Note, it's not inclusive plus exclusive minus 180 degrees. It's inclusive and extractive, which is more like 145 degrees. She turned into German and asked her interpreter, and then the 3 or 4 ministers with her, for the various German synonyms for extractive. And they came up with about 15. And I thought, you know, and they could have done more, that the words were getting longer, of course, because they're German words, that if you applied that thesis to Canada, where our communities work best and where we thrive best, it's where we have that spirit of inclusiveness, both in our economics and our politics, and where we begin to founder is when we get extractive.
I think that's a really interesting point. I think there a time when we did absolutely come together, and you and I are old enough to remember this clearly, was 1967, our Centennial. What did that year mean to you?
Well, I think it was a coming of age for Canada. We carried off Montreal Expo in a way that brought the country together in an attractive fashion. I think it was Canada projecting itself on the world scene as a nation that counts in the pretty fundamental things. It was only a few years before that Lester Pearson won the Peace Prize. I think it was 1956. It was for the Suez invasion. And that was not only a celebration of Mr. Pearson's great statesmanship on the world scene, but it was the great record of Canadian soldiers, particularly peacekeepers, intervening so effectively in different parts of the world. I think it was a celebration of Canada being such a welcome country for immigrants and immigrants doing well. And I think it was a consciousness of Canadians that we don't define ourselves of who we are not. We're not thus, but who we are. And that these traditions of which I spoke just a moment ago are very precious ones, not only for us in making healthy communities, but for making a peaceful and better world. Coming back to the conversation with Chancellor Merkel, learning how to live with difference, learning how to resolve disputes in a way that doesn't escalate, but very often means giving up something, but arriving at a solution that both or many parties can live with is very much a Canadian tradition. We have not had a war of independence. We have not had revolutionary wars. We've grown by evolution. We've put differences together, including the famous agreement in 1763 when we said to our French-Canadian compatriots, who were the same number or a little larger than what later became Canada then, that your language is important and it will be respected and will be reinforced in Canada. Your religion, which was an important matter, Protestant versus Catholic, those will be respected. Your system of law, which is a continental system, the continental law, the civil code will be respected, and it worked. And to that day, that bargain, that ability to find the common ground and look for the common ground has been very much a Canadian tradition.
So if 1967 was our coming of age, what will 2017 be?
I hope it will give us the opportunity, one, to celebrate the goodness of this country and our achievements in continuing that tradition, that it will be a place that is even better for our children than it is for us, and in some respects we're challenged in that respect. I hope it'll also be a time for reflection, where we will ask again, equality of opportunity is important to us, but is it really as widespread as it should be? The answer is no. Sean Atleo will be speaking to you later in your conference. Sean will speak eloquently about the needs of our Indigenous people. I'm particularly passionate about the subject of education. We have such an opportunity right now to do something to provide real equality of opportunity. So I hope it'll be a reflection of that kind, Sheila. And I hope in the birthday tradition, we'll think of when you have a birthday, you make a gift. And that each of us will consider what kind of gift we make to Canada to mark our 150th, and will cause that kind of exploration within our community. What kind of gift do we give our community to ensure that that community is a healthy and secure place for the children that will come after us?
So what is the message you would like to leave everybody here with as we head towards 2017?
Keener minds, kinder hearts, smart and caring nation. Let's do it by community, and that will be reinforcing for, I think, the whole country. Just like that Olympic torch, that was part of Vancouver 2010, that was carried in every community. Vancouver 2010 was such a triumph because it was a triumph that was shared by all Canadians. And that notion of a caring and smart nation, where both adjectives are important. Being smart and being caring come together, and we can look to the world and say we think Canada has a contribution to make to a better place to live.
Well, I have to say, as I've been here in the last 24 hours, the name, Your Excellency, has just created such a buzz. And you're a rock star here. No.
I can't wait to tell my grandchildren, who call me Grandpa Book. And I'll just end with a story that I haven't quite figured out the rock star yet. I'm just doing a 5th edition of a book called Canadian Securities Regulation.
Oh, I want to interview you about it on our program.
I'm glad you do. If any of you have difficulty sleeping, I've got the solution. One page of this book will do it. And we were doing the 3rd edition of it about, it'd be 8 or 9 years ago, with my co-author is a wonderful a lady from Calgary who was a graduate student of mine. All the work I do is the result of my students carrying the old man. And when we finished the manuscript and it was in the printer's hand, she sent me an email saying I was carrying my first child, Nolan, as I was writing this wretched manuscript. Do you think we could recognize it in the foreword and say that, you know, Nolan had to endure this experience as well? And I said, of course we can. Let's dedicate the book to Nolan. Email comes back, can we do that? I said, sure, it's our book. So then the email comes back, your first grandchild and our 10th grandchild arrived a week ago, I want you to know. Little Joshua, not bad. Our first grandchild had arrived in our family a couple of years before that, a little girl adopted from Colombia. So we added Emma's name to it as well.
Oh, nice.
So a couple years after that, Emma's now 4, and I go to Emma's house in Ottawa. We lived in Waterloo then, and I read the book. I always bring a book to the grandchildren, read it. And her mother said to her, Em, why don't you get your favorite book for Grandpa Book? So Em goes off to her bedroom, and she comes staggering back with this great tome, Canadian Securities Regulation, 3rd edition. Drops it on the floor, opens it up, and points to her name, Emma. And she says, Grandpa Book, that's my name. I says, it sure is, Emma. And you wrote that book just for me, didn't you, Grandpa Book? Yes, I did, Emma. Grandpa Book, the next time you write a book for me, will you put some pictures in it? So much for the rock star.
Your Excellency, thank you, and you rock.
And you dance.
Thank you.